Welcome back to the Wheel Talk podcast. I am your step-in host again for today. My name's Lauren Rowney, and I am joined today by the lovely Gracie Alban.
Who was she going to say first? G'day, everyone.
And we're joined again by Georgie Howe.
Hello from very hot Melbourne.
Who is also lovely.
Oh, also lovely. Sorry, Georgie.
I was not my hair.
Not my hair. I was confused.
I feel like my hair is like out of the set of Matilda. I feel like I could just go straight into Matilda with this hair at the moment. I didn't do it today.
Like Matilda, the 1995 movie.
Oh, yeah, no, the OG. Yeah, like Miss Trunchbull and everything.
You're definitely not Miss Trunchbull right now. You're definitely
one of my best mates is a hammer thrower. So
fun fact.
Yeah.
Well, we just had the UAE tour on the weekend. The second stage race of the season, I believe. World Tour stage race. And there's a lot to unpack about the race. Do we want to get into a bit of news first, or should we just jump straight into the race?
We can talk about the race, I reckon.
Yeah, let's do the race.
All right. Well, stage one was won by, unsurprisingly, Lorena Wiebes to Charlotte Kool. And third place went to Nienke Veenhoven from Visma Lease Bike, which was, I think, probably her best result to date on the World Tour stage. She's only 20 years of age, so a rider with huge potential. But let's dive into the stage a bit. 150 kilometers, as we mentioned in the preview to this podcast, that wind, of course, plays a huge factor in these races. We've seen it in the past two editions, how that has determined the GC as well as the stage results. I don't think there's too much to say about the stage itself, but you can jump in, Georgie or Gracie, about this. I really want to go into the sprint at the end because I replayed it quite a few times just to focus on what the sprint trains were doing and more specifically the top sprinters. So we had a lot of sprinters showing up to this tour. We had Consoni, we had Wiebes, we had Kool. We had like young riders like Veenhoven. Balsamo from Trek.
I mean, Alison Jackson was there as well, but just before we get to the sprint, I think it'd be good to talk about the crash that took out 29 riders. And I think it was like halfway through. From the replay I saw, it was from the left-hand side of the peloton. Don't think that wind played a huge factor on that first day, but like there was a clip of wheels with Letizia Paternoster from Liverlula Jaco basically doing a cartwheel in the peloton, and then that took in the middle of the peloton, and then that took out the rest of the riders. And Stephen Delacour from FDJ made a comment regarding this crash and indeed the safety of riders moving forward. And he said, if we want to change the future of our sport, the riders need to change their mentality. If this doesn't change, it's sure that the next generation won't want to ride in a bike competition.
What did he even mean by that comment? What was that about?
I think that's a bit rich, I think.
Again, Gracie and I can draw on our experience from 15 years ago that these early season crashes are unsurprising, particularly in this sort of race. Now, we did speak about on the last podcast that we had that block of racing down under. That's really good, actually, for a lot of riders to get out those, I'll call them the pre-season or pre-classics nerves out of the system. But Tour of Qatar, which was the predecessor before this race, I would say, in terms of this style of race, it wasn't uncommon, particularly in stage one. And I distinctly remember the meetings around going to that race, and particularly stage one, stage two, there are a lot of nerves, particularly when it's predicted that it's going to be a sprint finish. And of course, I think Lizzie Diamond made some good comments. She just said that when there isn't that much wind and riders are just sort of rolling around, I think we were almost halfway through the race at this point, that people tend to switch off. So I've seen that before. You're just maybe not concentrating as much, and that's where the clipping of the wheels happens, is just, you're not 100% concentrating. And yeah, I think the comments from Delcourt were pretty strong, but I wouldn't say this is unusual behavior. I think he was also getting at the point that riders are just taking too much risk, which we can definitely get into. But from my perspective, quite a few of these crashes it is just nerves, people trying to figure out where they are in the bunch, switching off perhaps a little bit just because the race wasn't as exciting as maybe anticipated. But of course, it was going to be a sprint finish without those hectic wind conditions like we saw on stage 2.
Yeah,
I think Georgie can speak to this, but like I have, as a commentator and viewer, have seen the skill of riders increase so much the last few years. I feel like in general, there's way less crashes. The quality of the peloton is quite high now. There's not a huge discrepancy of skill levels, and crashes still just happen. And especially as you're saying, Lauren, like those moments happen sometimes. And I don't think that's about mentality or skill. It's just bad moments here and there. And actually, we don't see them as much as we used to, in my opinion. What do you think, Georgie? Did you see the change in your time racing at that level in the recent years?
I really hate this quote from Delco. I think it's a really unfair quote. The whole point about riders needing to change their mentality, I'm not sure is entirely fair. This isn't a case of a rider needing to change their mentality. This is just a case of poor judgment, like lack of concentration and bad luck. We see it in the men's peloton as well. It's just a clip of wheels. Like that crash didn't warrant this kind of attack, I guess, on the quality of the women's field, because I would agree with Gracie that the skill level has gone up. It's a different sport to what it was even 3 years ago to now. But I will say that, like, having spoken to people over there in UAE, I had a quote from a girl over there who just said, like, now it's not only about the strongest legs, but about who breaks last. And I think that comes with things like sprinting and taking a corner. And I'm sure we'll see more of that in the Belgian Classics. And I'm keen to kind of dive in a bit deeper through like an article or like investigative format around like the psyche of the women's peloton, because I think there's more to that than just like the mentality of the riders like being careless. I think it's more than that. And I actually think it will attract more generations. I don't think it will deter, but the skill of the peloton is certainly way higher than even 3 years ago.
Yeah, I have to agree with you guys on that one. And it's interesting because Delcourt is someone who is quite vocal in the media, but not often with these sorts of comments. But yeah, unfortunately, that did impact a few riders. And one of those was Alison Jackson. She did finish the stage, but after visiting the hospital, they found out she had broken scaphoid, which is a very annoying little bone to break. It's in a strange place. And yeah, we wish her all the best. And then, of course, Paternoster was a bit banged up, but she didn't finish the tour, but she went home. So it was a bit of a dramatic start to the tour. I wouldn't say, like I said before, it's not unusual for these sorts of crashes to happen. And I think just the sort of roads as well that you're racing on there is a lot of room to move around. And I think sometimes that's where people get a little bit lazy as well. Because when you're racing in Europe on those farm roads and just smaller roads, you have to be you really have to switch on the whole race. Like for 150 kilometers, I would say the mental fatigue is sometimes more than the physical fatigue. So, but let's talk about the sprint, because I'm really curious to hear your opinions of this. I thought I really want to talk about Wiebes. And SD Works, I thought, for stage 1 did a really good job of getting her into the right position. It looks like Barbara Garishi ran out of legs, and that is why Wiebes had to open up her sprint. However, she looked to her right, and Charlotte Kool was actually forced to sprint pretty early. So I think Kool was way too far back. Wiebes, I think, came around that 700 meters to go in what was like third or fourth wheel, like good position on the left-hand side. She had plenty of room to move. Garishi runs out of steam. She looks to her right. Kool has already opened up her sprint, and then she goes. So for me, it looked like an effortless win for Wiebes. During that whole time, I don't think she was really under any stress. She is one of the best riders at surfing the bunch. So if she loses her train or her lead out rider, she doesn't often panic. She finds a way through. But yeah, I think for Kool, and we're going to get into the other stages, this was the only opportunity, I think, where she was going to have a chance at the win, or stage 4. because of how stage 2 played out. And unfortunately, yeah, she opened up her sprint way too early. So by the time Wiebes got going, there was just no way she was going to contest it.
I like to see other teams as well with their trains getting organised. I think Human Powered Health were a good train as well. It's good to see them trying to build some confidence in some of their riders. They didn't nail it, far from it on that day, but I think you have to try, and they'll have learned a lot from that. Visma Lisa Bike as well, they've been pushing with their train. I think they would have learnt a lot as well, but SD Works, they have that confidence already. I think if they didn't have Wiebes being so much stronger than everyone else, they couldn't get away with how they're doing it. I think Wiebes is making up for a lot. I still think SD Works does a good job in the lead up for sure. And I like that they often come late. They're really disciplined. But I think that their overall strength wasn't quite there, but they had enough strength just to pull off that move that they usually do. And Wiebes made up for a bunch of little mistakes and was still just way stronger than everyone else. So yeah, you can definitely be critical of some of her teammates here and there, but like maybe it's just preseason. They don't quite have the legs yet. Obviously, Wiebes does have the legs already, not just in the sprints, but in the tougher day on stage 2, which we'll have a chat about in a sec. So yeah, I don't know. I think it must be frustrating for other sprinters that know that they don't have heaps of opportunities in the year, and this tour is a good one, to be like, oh, we're already pretty far off the mark, and this is, the first round of sprints for the year. So I think that's a bit rough for some of those other fast riders to see Wiebes so much stronger and being able to get away with not having the perfect run into those sprints.
Yeah, like the next real crack they'll have is what Bruges de Panne.
Yeah.
That's like the next real sprint world tour race that we'll have. So kind of, I think we were told when we did it, it's like the Sprinters World Championships. So we'll see if DSM can clean up their game, because Wiebes was just night and day ahead of everyone else.
Yeah, so to your point, Gracie, I mean, if you're a sprinter now, like you would want to show up at this tour with really good legs. Hopefully you've just come from a training camp with your team, so you've done lots of like sprint train, lead outs and such. I remember that was something before Tour of Qatar. A lot of the European teams would go off to Mallorca or such, and they would take that team with to prepare them for Qatar and then to go on to the classics. So like, it's a pretty tough position if you're a rider who has just switched teams and this is the first race you're doing with the team, because I can imagine the internal pressure would be quite high. Like if you think of Consoni, she's just moved to Canyon SRAM and she really didn't have a great week, in my opinion. She wasn't up there. She crashed and just didn't really have a good run at it. So that can sometimes take a little bit of, it can take a bit of a blow to the confidence, I would say, if you're not a seasoned rider. But yeah, Wiebes is already shown that she has a lot of form. She's a rider who can go into these classics races and she can win a race like Umlaut Het Nieuwsblad. So it's not like she is waiting for Bruges de Panne for her next opportunity. This is just adding to that growing tally of wins.
Yeah, she's nearly at 100.
Yeah, she's what, 94?
96.
96.
Which is insane for a rider who is only, I think, 25 years old.
Yeah.
I listened to a podcast today that discussed failure in a sports team is almost easy because there's clear actionable items that you can learn from to improve. So obviously DSM will kind of go away, assess that. Human Powered Health will go away and assess the fact that they didn't get the W on that day. But I think SD Works, it'll be interesting to see how they go this season in the most difficult part of a sports team, which is what this podcast was referring to, around the struggle with the disease of more. So always trying to when you're pushing for that result, you're part of the whole, you've got a common goal. But when you do eventually reach that goal, everyone gets a bit of an ego, everyone wants a little bit more. So it'd be interesting to see how that team handles that moving forward with the dominance of riders like Wiebes and Kopecky.
Yeah, I think this goes for a few teams as well that are just trying to find their feet. There were big changes in Trek from 2024 to 2025, and we could see that actually in this race, because I think Balsamo is really missing Elisa Longa Borghini. Elisa was the one who was driving it with 2 kilometers to go and basically was setting up her sprinter.
And Eleanor, like they're missing Eleanor Backstead as well. Like she was pivotal in that Trek train.
Exactly. And those two riders we just mentioned, we're going to talk about in stage 2 and what happened there. But yeah, it's a bit of what we'll call like growing pains when you have such big changes in teams. And sometimes it can take a while for things to click, particularly when you have a team like Trek who had this core group that were together for quite a long time, and it was working. And now there's been a big reshuffle. And what we've seen from this tour, I think, is, that UAE are going to be one of those teams that have the numbers there in the finale and are making the race. So I think that's a good segue to jump into stage 2, which was, I think, my favorite stage.
Oh, wasn't it great? Like power PBs in neutral. That's going to be a good race.
Yeah.
Oh, that's brutal. I know, Lauren, you probably know how that feels as well. If you remember the Tour of Qatar stages where you were just like already like gritting your teeth behind this neutral car and you just knew that it was about to be war as soon as they dropped that flag. And it was just so scary.
Yeah, and that's basically what happened on stage 2 is the flag dropped and it was game on. I think it was one of the shortest stages in the race, if not the shortest. But from the get-go, it was UAE who made the race. And basically within the first few kilometers, a break of 5 was established. It was utter chaos behind as groups were trying to form and, find their way around. One thing I had to go back and watch because I started the race right at the start and then I walked away to go make a coffee and then shit just happened. So to go back and rewind to see what happened. But Weebers was actually in that second group and managed to jump across, which, ended up being the winning move. At the time, did we think that group of 5 was going to go all the way to the finish because they were hovering at not the largest gap?
No, and 9 seconds, 19 seconds, 15
for a
seconds.
long time. I think with 70 kilometers to go, it had gone out finally to 40 seconds. And it wasn't until about 64 kilometers, then we saw that huge jump to 3 minutes. But for the longest time, they were just hovering there. But let's talk about the composition of that move. So Elisa Longo-Borghini with her 2 teammates, Caroline Swinkles and Lara Gillespie. And then we had Lily Williams from Human Powered Health. And we had Lorena Wiebes, who was isolated. Surprisingly, no SD works with her there. The group was working well. I think Lorena and Lily, you could see at times were sort of laying off the gas a little bit. Of course you would if you've got 3 teammates from UAE there. There were 2 races within that race. You had Elisa, who was trying to get time on the other GC riders behind her. And then, of course, Lorena going for the win. And I would say this is the same for Lily Williams, who at the end of such a hard race, she could have potentially taken on Lorena. We know she's a fantastic track rider. Where do we start with this?
I'm really impressed with Gillespie just straight off the bat. She came from the UAE development team, so she spent a few years there at that U23 development level, and she's made the step up this year to the World Tour team. And for her to read the race in that way and get across to that gap, clearly she's going to be a rider to watch in the years to come. So that was really cool to see. Yeah, and also I think Lily Williams to me is like the people's champ, so always good to see her up there in the move. She came off a very successful 2024 with an Olympic gold medal in that team's pursuit team. So really strong move. The UAE were fully committed. They were just like, no, this is what we're doing. This is the plan. And from kilometer 0, that break went 2.4 kilometers in, but there was a full fight. They had a fairly big group of 20, and then it was the line of death, and then riders dropping off, and then we had 3 groups on the road. And then there's that epic shot of the group of 5 with 3 solid echelons behind them just down this highway in Saudi, which is just nuts. So yeah, I think it was a fantastic race. I really didn't want to go to bed, but I had to go to sleep. But I watched until the headwind section when the gap really blew out. So they really capitalized on that one headwind section before they turned back into the crosswind.
Yeah, and I think as the commentary team said, when this happens in a race like this, when you hit those crosswinds and the gaps start to form and people start losing wheels. The first thing you have to do when you miss the move is form that second echelon, form that third echelon, and just start working. Get everyone together. And it was, in that regards, pretty organized. I mean, I think if you watched Tour of Qatar 10 plus years ago, you wouldn't have seen that organization. It was just chaos. It was like the first group would go, and then everyone behind was just like, no one was willing to work with one another. So that's the first thing. So for me, watching that, I guess a lot of people were thinking, is Elisa wasting her energy here? Because the two groups behind were cooperating, they were working well. Various teams had multiple teammates within those groups. But like you said, Georgie, when we hit around that, I think 60 or so kilometers to go and there was headwind, it just blew out then.
Like they hit the intermediate sprint and you could see like Longo went for the sprint. She went for the seconds. Lily Williams and Weavers didn't even want a bar of it. It was quite bizarre. Like, she went at like 90%. Like it was a solid sprint that she laid off the back for, and her teammates were lining it up for her. So she was really hunting every second she could get. So UAE were fully committed to get as much time as possible to the line.
And they did in the end. I mean, this group went all the way to the finish, and Elisa Longo Borghini put 1 minute 26 seconds into the next GC contenders, we thought at the time, which was Pauline Prevot, Kim Lacourte and Rihanna Marcus, as well as Trinka Colnol. So, stage 2 did a lot of damage to the GC already. I mean, we had quite a few riders that I can't remember if we discussed in last week's podcast or if it was offline. Riders like Ashley Millman-Passio, who wouldn't, love these sort of conditions, but showed up. You had Urshka, Juliette Labou, quite a few riders. Labou can hold herself in these sort of conditions as well. So I think, there were a lot of GC riders who walked away from stage 2 probably with the spirits down a little bit, considering how strong Elisa Longo Borghini was on stage 2. I must admit, I didn't doubt what she was going to do on stage 3. I think she's had a really strong winter, like a really good off season. And she basically came to this race for two things: test the legs out and just to show what the team's got for the season. And her whole team was incredible. Like every rider on that team just went above and beyond. I am loving Eleanor Backstead on this team. I feel we're going to see so much more from her in 2025. And the damage was done.
It's terrifying how strong Longo is, can I just say, this early in the season.
Yeah, it is.
Terrifying or exciting?
I mean, now exciting, now that it's not tearing my legs off. But what would be terrifying for another rider to see that?
Yeah, like I feel like, it's cool to have seen so much from her the last few years and still think, what else has she got left? And she's been doing this for so long now. Like it's a little bit Annemiek-esque of continuing to improve as she ages. Which not everyone can do. And it's certainly a feature of endurance sports to be able to do that. But it's still asking a lot from your body and your mind, and to do it on stepping into a brand new team after you've been comfortable for a long time. Sometimes riders need that refresh, that shake up, that new team to get the best out of themselves again. And I think, that was a big reason why she wanted to move on, because she wanted to get back out of her comfort zone. But it doesn't mean that it's easy, even if you want that. Change is always going to come with some challenges. So, obviously she's happy, healthy, had a good off-season, pre-season. And then the other question is, did she get too excited? Did she do too much in the off season? How long can that peak last? If she's at a peak, or if we don't know if she is or not, it certainly looks to be, but maybe she's like, I'm only at 80%. So it's going to be interesting, I guess, once we hit the classics, and especially the tail end of the classic season, which, arguably suits her better, to see kind of how she keeps that trajectory going, and what other objectives she has for the year.
When's Strata? Like
The 8th of
8th of
March.
March.
So I get what you're thinking, Georgie. Yep.
yeah, I think that's this is a peak for Strata.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean that's 4 weeks away. So, the opening of the classics it's around the corner. The 1st of March is Umlopet Newsblood. I think UAE is going to show up and definitely be quite dominant there. Particularly if they bring a similar team like this. And I would say the riders that we saw at UAE are the riders that could do very well there. So this could be a bit of a showing for what is to come. But yeah, it's a good point, Gracie, that the tail end of the sprint, it's hard to imagine like if Elisa is where she is now, and we haven't even talked about stage 3, how long can you hold that for when the end of the classics is, I think, the 25th of April? Which is more than 2 months away. But I guess, we've got many podcasts to come and that will be revealed. So to finish off the stage, Weavers unsurprisingly took the win. However, I did say maybe Williams would challenge. We were waiting for her to do like the long range hit out, which didn't really come. And then, of course, Lara Gillespie got 3rd place on, a nice podium for her after that great ride. And then the Queen stage, stage 3, the longest stage. Wait, before we get into that, we should mention that stage 2 was the fastest race or stage ever?
Race, I believe.
Fastest race.
It seems like every year we get them. Like the stage 3 of the Vuelta in 2023 was the fastest, and then we had another one last year, and then we got another one this year. It's really exciting.
Yeah. So there you go. That was a nice way to open up the legs before the longest stage of the tour, which came in at over 150 kilometers with the famous final climb up Jebel Hafit. Where do we get in? So usually with a stage like this, you see teams, riders trying to get off the front, get a bit of a gap because it takes the pressure off the GC. And just makes it a little bit of an easier day running into what's going to be like a hectic finale. There was some wind on the day, but it wasn't enough to make a real difference in what the outcome was at the end of the day. There was a split of 12 riders at 68 kilometers to go, with the usual suspects present like Longa Borghini, Balsamo, Dygert, Williams, Backstead, Pauline Prevost made the move. Barbara Garishi, Weebers, but that all sort of came back together. Lebu actually missed that. And so I think at 62 kilometers to go, it was only holding at 15 seconds, but it all came back together. Then with 25 kilometers to go, a group of 3 went up the road. So that was Marta Luck, Victoria Berteau, and Amelie Deirdreson. And then the peloton was quite happy for that to stick. So that group got around a minute or so on the peloton, and then things were getting organized behind. So all the teams were getting their GC riders into the right position for what was to come, which was basically a 10-kilometer climb. The place was blistering going into the bottom. And surprisingly, very early on, we saw Silvia Persico take the front and start setting the pace. I think around 9 kilometers to go. She set such a blistering pace, or just a hard tempo, that a rider like Caroline Swinkles, who usually can climb quite well, she was already distanced with about 7.8 kilometers to go, along with Weebers. Shortly after that, surprisingly, Rihanna Marcus fell off the back of the bunch. And then within the next kilometer, the last 2 riders who were out front, which was Marta Luck and Victoria Berteau, were caught. Persico just kept on driving the pace on the front, and slowly but surely, riders just kept dropping off the back. Next to fall off the back was Pauline Prevost, shortly followed by Lebu and Dygert. Good ride by Dygert, I would say. Cedric Cabell was the next. And then with 5.5 kilometers to go, we only had 9 riders left in the bunch. We had Persico, we had Elisa Longo Borghini, we had Garcia, Ninka Vinca, Barbara Macotti, Antonia Niedermeyer, Kim Lacourt, Miamont, and Trinka Conol. So quite a good group there. Some standout riders, of course, were Elisa Longoborghini. We expected Garcia, Ninka Vinca, good ride by her. Some really good young talents. And then with 3.5 kilometers to go, I think it was, that's when Garcia, or was it 5K to go, she hit out.
5, I think.
5. Yeah, she hit out, but it all sort of came back together. Longoborghini didn't seem to be that fussed by it. Lacourte, we could already see, was on a really good day, and she managed to also close that gap. That group of 9 came back together. But then it was the big move by Longoborghini with 3.5 kilometers to go. So Persico had done all that work until then, and then you could see the steam was starting to run out of her legs. And that was like the moment to go. I think Elisa had a pretty good idea that everyone was on the limits, and no one could follow her. She went and the gap opened, and then it was just scrambling behind for those last 8 riders to sort of figure out where they were going to go. And I think Lacourte tried to go. So yeah, and then Persico came back, and it was Elisa Longoborghini who took the win, and the sprint for second was between Persico and Kim Lacourte, with Persico narrowly taking it, and as such getting that small little margin over Kim Lacourte. That the GC was then Elisa Longoborghini, Silvio Persico, surprisingly, after such an incredible effort, and Kim Lacourte. So, thoughts?
That was a great stage recap, by the way. Well done.
Yeah.
I'm trying to like channel Abby. Abby is the master at this, and I'm doing my best. But that was probably the best recap I've given thus far. Great stage. For me, one of the most exciting things I have to say was Silvia Persico. And just to see her back at her 2021 form is just the best thing. And I think we said last year when it was announced Elisa was going to UAE that they could become such a powerful duo. And I think they've already shown that.
Again, scary.
Yeah, there must be some good vibes in that team for this season to be bouncing off each other so well already, and to be in such good form. You know, that shows obviously individual inner motivations in the off season and pre-season, but you know, they're still coming together for team camps, and that team camp effect is a huge effect in the way that you can get fit and gain that excitement and trust in each other, and that team motivation, I guess, too, because you can have a team full of hitters that all have their individual motivations, but if you can't find a way to bring it all together, it may not work. So I think that this is a little bit of a window into what we might see from the UAE Team ADQ for the rest of the season. But I think for all of the races that they would want to do well at, this is the home race that goes a long way for their sponsors. So it's a pretty awesome way to kick off the year, and no doubt will, you know, be good for that team, for other riders, and for the future.
And and Kim Lacourte had a fantastic ride as well. For her to be up there bodes really well for the season ahead. That team has some great horsepower with Moorman, as we spoke about, Ushka, Manley as well, and the Ardennes will be scary with the likes of Kim in there to support. Unfortunately, Moorman and Ushka really struggled in the crosswinds. You would think that there would be a bit more support in this team for that, but at the end of the day, you have to ride the echelon yourself. You have to pick the moment. You have to get in there yourself. So there's only so much support that one can have in crosswinds. So I would have liked to see those guys on there. I did hear that Ushka was off the back, and yet she still made up time and finished decently, I guess one could say, on this stage. But yeah, Lacourte had a great ride, and Persico, for kind of like Naomi Rugg at TDU, was like off the back, then came back, then off the back, then came back, and then to sprint for the win. I love that performance. It's just so entertaining, and like I think she's a really talented but like charismatic rider. So I'm like keen to follow her story throughout the year.
Yeah, me too. But I'm also really keen to follow the story of Lacourte. I think she was someone that's been on our radar a little bit the last couple of seasons, and she's got a really cool backstory that there was an Escape article about a while back. But she seems like she can do it all as well. I think you often see that colourful jersey in the sprints too, and she's got this like naivety in the bunch that I love. Like she's just not afraid to just try and go all out. And it's like she's not afraid to fail yet. And I think that's going to see her to some good results this year.
Yeah, like the Ardennes stage of the tour, Lauren, where we had a chat.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, it's Kopecky because I thought it was the world champs jersey.
Yeah. It was Lacourte.
Yeah, but she was like right up there with the front group in that really shockingly rainy stage in the Ardennes.
I think we were picking her for a stage win then, weren't we, at the tour?
Yeah, we were. Yeah.
Yeah. No, huge talent.
Capable.
And we love to see, mountain bikers doing their stuff in the pro peloton, because I think that's her background, right?
Yeah.
But another amazing performance was, I thought, from Monica Trinca Colonel. I'm sorry if I butchered your name.
I'm going to hang you out to dry for this one, but I don't know.
Yeah, I need to work on the Italian. And Barbara Macotti, two young Italian riders who had a really good performance. Antonia Niedermeyer was up there as well. And from Seritis Pro Cycling was Dixeline Miamont, as well as Ninka Vinca. So some really strong performances there from some of the young riders, which, we always have to write down their names and pay attention to them moving through the season because, I think it's always easy to focus on the big names. I know I do it myself too much, and I really have to, I think you mentioned this, Gracie, like take note of these riders who are like starting to show something, and try and figure out who they are in the bunch and learn their style. So a really good stage. And I think the GC was all but decided after that stage for the win, but for second and third, it was pretty close between Lacourte and Persico, and we saw some interesting tactics on stage 4, which was the final sprint stage, where UAE was supporting Persico to go for that second place. So they helped her defend her second on GC by going for the sprint points. She got full support from, I think it was Elena Backstead and maybe Caroline Swinkles. Lisa Longa-Borghini was even in there at one point. So they outnumbered Kim Lacourte, and she managed to take both sprint points. I can't remember, at least the first. But the stage itself was quite aggressive. I think the standout team in terms of aggression and really trying to make something of the race was FDJ Suez. So stage 4 of 2024, there was an upset with the sprinters because Amber Crack managed to hold her lead attack all the way to the finish line. And just held on. So I think there were a lot of teams that came into stage 4 having not got any result. It's the last opportunity to do anything. So, FDJ Suez were throwing everything at it. Los Atajist was super aggressive. She was in multiple moves in the day. She got in one of the major moves of the day, which was a 3-rider break that became 5 when she bridged across with one other rider. The break went out to 1 minute, and I think it was out there for 30 odd kilometers or so. But, there was too much interest in that final sprint, particularly from teams like SD Works, who wanted to get Weavers up for the third victory. And of course, post NL Picnic, they needed to get cool up there again. So that break came back. And then shortly after, it was Eleanor Barker who launched with 32 kilometers to go. No one went with her, unfortunately, but she put in a really solid effort to take that all the way to the final kilometers, where then we had the sprint trains lining up for that finale. So let's dive into the finish. Thoughts for the final sprint stage?
Oh, just going back to what I was talking about with SD Works, like they kind of did a good job, but they also stuffed it up a bit. But Weber's just looked after herself, and it's really cool. I love seeing the overhead shots of her because obviously she's so strong. She's got great form because you have to be super fit to control yourself in that hectic finale. She's constantly getting out of the seat. So she's doing little sprints in those last couple of K. She's getting up and down from the seat, which that's really hard to do, and then sprint as well. So just the fact that she can do all of that without a lot of help is so impressive. And to see where those openings are coming up, it looks like she's getting boxed in and then suddenly she's back in a good position again. Like, I love going back and rewatching and picking different riders in those last two or 3K in different teams, because you can't see it all at once. And so like the first shot, for some reason, I just was watching Visma because they're bright yellow probably. And they caught my eye because they came late. And then I was like, no, I need to figure out where the hell Weebus was. And so I watched her, and then I watched a couple of other people, but it's just like so interesting to see how she does it. It's like this culmination of skills of being able to think really quickly, having that strength, and knowing that you can spend energy and not being afraid of that. And I think that's key to being a good sprinter, is knowing when you need to move yourself and not save.
And we've seen that, right? Like, I really suggest people who are just interested in sprinting in general, or you're a sprinter in yourself, you want to learn more. Like, Weebus is like a Scarlet Pimpernel. Like, she can put herself, like I was doing the same thing, Gracie. I was going back. I think I rewatched it 7 times because I kept trying to look at where different riders were. Like, where was cool? Where did she end up? Was, she trying to stay on her lead rider too long, and then she ended up getting boxed and she couldn't get out again. But Weebus,
there was a crash too at the end of this stage.
Barbieri came down.
which we'll get into. But like those final kilometers, it was like a bit of a washing machine. Like, you had, I think it was Trek and Human Power Health that like were hugging the left. There was this big split down the middle, and then a teams on the right. And then like, when the teams on the right just decide to swing across to the left, then if you're sort of on that left and too far back, you get caught up in that whole mess. Yeah. And that's where you can really lose your train. And in that moment, this is where like the really seasoned sprinters, or just people like Weebus, who clearly is just very calm and comfortable, takes a breath and goes, okay, I need to get out of this situation and look for those gaps. And there are very few riders who can see those gaps and make their way through. Granted, she has a lot of respect in the bunch, so she can make things, she can get through places where I think a lot of people can't, but she is a very safe rider. And just watching her sort of navigate, like for those last kilometers, she lost her riders. I think Garishi at one point was on the left trying to open it up, but had no idea that Weebus was actually on the other side, and was, following cool at one point. But she really just made her way through and did that sprint on her own. She found herself in the right position. And there are just very few riders, I think, that can do that.
I like that you said that she's safe as well, because we've seen plenty of sprinters over the years that are not that safe, and they just throw their bike everywhere and they don't care who crashes, and they often crash themselves. And it's really frustrating to have those those busy bees, I guess. I don't know another good way to say it right now, but like they don't do anyone any favors. And to see Weebus in such control of her own body, she uses her size effectively. She's broad across the shoulders. She puts her handlebars just ahead of someone else's, but she doesn't slam into anyone. Like, she's pushing into the gaps without like throwing herself into them. And like, I find that really cool to watch as well, because she's really controlled and being safe as well, which not every sprinter does.
No, she's a good example to definitely look at. And like, when can't say I've been on a wheel in a sprint, but just like on a wheel, like in and around, like just the general races, like she's very smooth. That's like, she just moves effortlessly up to the front. She knows when to move. She has the respect, but yeah, to your point, Gracie, she just has the skill as well. Like she's perceptive as to how her body moves in space, which I don't think many riders are, particularly sprinters.
Yeah. And in those final few hundred meters, was it Consoni who came down?
She definitely came down. She lost her shoe.
Yeah, so it was Consoni, and I went back and had to replay that a few times to figure out how that crash happened, because that crash basically, ended the race for quite a few people. Like, it it was game over. It was a pretty nasty crash, but I think people walked away pretty unscathed. I haven't checked up on that, but what happened was it looked like a Trek rider was going back, and I don't know if she stopped pedaling, but she laid off the gas a little bit. And I think Consoni was trying to move out and anticipated the rider would keep moving at the same speed. And she's just clipped her back wheel, and that was it.
Yeah.
That was my impression of what happened. So not like an unsafe maneuver, but it looked like she was just moving out, and the speed of the Trek rider just, I don't know, died. She's just gone. So
it wasn't for lack of skill. It was just like moving through traffic. That's all it was.
So I feel for her. I mean, what a week. Not being able to really get in amongst the sprint stages and then to come down is a pretty rough start to the season with the new team. But I still think that she's going to have a great year with Canyon SRAM. I would have liked to see her go head-to-head with Cool and Weebers, and it was unfortunate that Cool got boxed in and couldn't open up her sprint in that final stage. But it was a really good result for Sara Fioren from Siritiers Pro Cycling, who ended up second, and then Amelie Didriksen from the Cofidis women's team. So she's just switched teams, and it looked like she had a pretty good week getting amongst it, and then to finish off with a podium. It's been a while since Didriksen has been on a World Tour podium, so it was really cool to see her back up there again, the former world champion.
Yeah, she won in Qatar, so it would have felt good to come back to similar landscape and get a stage win. But yeah, she hasn't had many runs on the board for a while now, has she?
No, I had to go back. I think it was 2-3 years ago was her last podium, and that wasn't a World Tour race. So yeah, really good to see her still there. And maybe, you know, going back to your point, Gracie, when you change teams, I know that she left SD Works and then went to Uno X, but maybe now another move was needed for her to try and grow again as a rider and an individual. She is a really fast rider, and I think it was 2017 that she. Let's hope we see more from her. But the final GC standings was Elisa Longo Borghini to Silvia Persico with 2 minutes. Kim Lacourt was 2 minutes and 8 seconds down for third. Monica Trinca-Conal was 2 minutes 18, and then Caroline Swinkles was in fifth GC. So a good tour, I think. The major takeaways was for us that UAE is going to be one of the teams with bunny ears to watch for the 2025 season. Will they be one of the top 3 super teams? Potentially.
Yeah, I mean, this could be a changing of the guard, right? SD Works, I mean, we haven't seen all of SD Works, but, you know, it's really exciting to see another team taking initiative and rising to the fore. You know, it's starting to spread the talent around. It's good for the sport.
For sure, a change of the guard at the top level, but I think we're just seeing an overall change of the guard too, to see some of those lesser known names in the top 10s on the podiums here. I think, you know, there was a good pedigree here on the start list at the tour, and there's plenty of riders that were way down the results sheets every day and on the GC, and there's plenty of youngsters that are coming up, not even on those top teams, on those smaller teams that are getting good results. So I think, yeah, it's just another example of that talent spreading across the board, and the professionalism also spreading across the teams to be able to foster new talent, to spot it in the first place, and to have the resources to then develop it properly. So I think that, yeah, we could see a real shake-up this year of who we're even talking about.
And we should note that, like, we spoke about the riders, of course, who did really well at this tour, but the riders who perhaps didn't have maybe the poor performances we as spectators expected, going to a race like this is still a really good thing to do in the lead up to the bigger races to come. So, you know, it's all part of the plan. I guess for a lot of people, there will be disappointed riders. Like, I'm sure someone like Consoni, as mentioned, would have wanted to have a crack at the win or at least podium here, because Canyon SRAM, like many teams, walked away with nothing. But, you know, it's kilometers in the legs. good weather before coming back over to Europe to get stuck into the sprint. And let me tell you, it is February 11th here and it is snowing in Belgium. And I checked the forecast and it doesn't look like it's going to get much warmer for when the opening weekend comes in just a few weekends' time. So
time to get the Blundstones out.
Yeah. The next World Tour race will be on look at Newsblad. Is World Tour or not?
Yeah. Oh, gotcha. Opening weekend.
Yeah, opening weekend, March the 1st. If it's not in your calendar, what are you doing? We will be back next week, of course, to talk about other things. I think next week will be the draft chat. So don't miss that one.
Oh, should we talk about Pro Velo quickly?
Oh, yeah. Warning. Sorry, Georgie. We were meant to
Oh, yeah, your big moment, Georgie.
Your big moment.
DS.
No, I told them, I was like, we'll talk podcast, we'll talk about the Pro Velo League, we'll amp it up.
Yeah, no, we should definitely.
So we had the Pro Velo League here in Australia. I think it's like 6 rounds of races, all up and down the East Coast, which basically amplifies the young talent here in Australia, with the winner of the Pro Velo League series in the U23 category getting a contract with the Liverpool Jayco team on the continental side. So it's interestingly not GC time across the series. It's points based. So each jersey has an amount of points that you can accrue, as well as like podiums and various places within that. But on the weekend, we had the historic Melbourne to Warrnambool, which since 2022 has been a women's only race from Colac. So Matilda Reynolds, who's also been a guest on this podcast, she's a 2-time winner of the Melbourne to Warrnambool when it was a joint race with the men. We raced together in 2022 when it was the women's only race. So a really historic race. And was lucky enough to DS a small Melbourne team, Nostromo, which was good fun. I had the pre-race and during race jitters. So a lot of coffee, a lot of hot cross buns, bananas in the car.
But we were for driving.
Yeah, exactly. I wasn't driving. Thankfully, I had 2 Oscars. One Oscar who was the mechanic, and one who was the driver. So I just had to focus on telling the girls what to do. But yeah, it was great. A huge turnout. We had 60 riders on the start line, and it was a roaring. I sent you guys a photo. Roaring crosstail. Gusts up to 56 k's an hour from the east, and fastest edition ever with a speed of over 40 k's an hour. And it was a solo winner with Caitlin Nicholson, who's the Oceania champ, taking out the W. Talia Appleton remains the race leader, as well as the leader of the under 23 series. There were some interesting tactics.
Yeah. What was that about? I mean, they basically let the wind go because...
Yeah, it wasn't great. You can only see so much from the car, and also we were car 7, so we were quite a fair way back. But when I rewatched the coverage, which Matilda Reynolds was also commentating, she did a great job with Sarah Gigante, actually. So that was really cool to see Sarah on there. It seemed that they had a small breakaway up the road of about 5, and then that got brought back. That had the series leader in it with Talia, and she's a very strong rider in her own right. But then that got brought back, and Caitlin attacked, and that's a known move from her. So similarly with Grace Brown, we used to say, like, how often does Grace need to attack and pull the same move before team up and like, oh, maybe we shouldn't let her go. Caitlin, similarly, like was on the team before it was named Praties. Bridge Lane was on that team, so Pat knows that rider, and yet they just let her go. And I wonder if it's because he's playing the series, he's not playing the race.
For sure. Having spoken to someone yesterday about it who was disappointed in how it was raced, for sure. They're protecting that U23, not the U23. Yeah. Or is it the U23 classification?
Yeah, so the winner of the so Talia, if she remains leader of the under 23s in the series, she gets the contract.
And honestly, you could have done both.
100%. She's a strong enough rider. 100%.
So yeah, I think that was a miss for them. They lost out on a win. Definitely. Great for Caitlin Nicholson. Strong
Huge.
rider.
I mean,
good for her.
She completely capitalized on, it's known that Praties will be playing the Pro Velo points. So like Butterfields, which is a team that Caitlin rides for now, was like, great, let's just play on that. So she attacked and they literally propped. Like Frankie Hall, which is Talia's teammate, waited about 5 seconds and then went to try and close, followed by Josie Pepper from the crit team here in Melbourne due to cycling. But yeah, bizarre tactics. And they even patched Pat in from the car before that move went. And they're like, Matt Keenan was like, oh, Pat, are you happy? And he's like, what do you mean? Of course we're happy. We have the numbers. This is a fantastic situation. But they still had Odette Lynch, who's a very fast sprinter. They had Keely Bennett, who's a really fast sprinter, and great rider in her own right. So there wasn't a great situation for Pat, but I think he was just worried about the fact that there were no under 23s in that group.
This is what we talk about, the races within races, but missed out on the win because of it. But, I hope for Talia she ends up with that, the overall U23. But I think Tour Tassie is the next one that's coming up.
Yeah, that's like later Feb. That should be really, that's 4 stages down there in Devonport and around that area. And then they head up to Sydney and then they do one on the sunny coast. So it's all around.
Yeah. And then I think that the season ends, and quite a few riders are going to then head over to Europe and try and have a crack over here. So Georgie will definitely keep a finger on the pulse with what's happening with Pro Velo and keep us in the loop with that, because I think it's interesting. And I did put a point here that it is getting tougher and tougher. Something we've spoken about before for Oceania athletes to get a foot in the door. I know a lot of the World Tour teams now aren't interested in Australian or New Zealand talent unless they have raced in Europe, regardless of numbers or what they've done down under. So while this is really good and it's important to have a really strong national series back like this, it is also very important to get those riders over here to do a stint in Europe, to get their name seen, but also just to get a feel for what it's like.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Great Ocean Road is one thing, but, what are they're trying to think of some road names in Belgium, but the Wolvenberg is a completely different beast.
Yeah, exactly. So cool. I think that's about it for the week, but we're going to finish off with what we're obsessed with. I wonder if we're all going to have the same obsession.
Prepared?
I do. I'm obsessed with all the adverts from the Super Bowl. I've just been watching them.
I've actually not seen any of them except for the Nike one, which was awesome.
The Nike one was brilliant, I think.
Need to go and actually look them up because Super Bowl ads are always good.
That was the first time in 27 years that they were in the Super Bowl.
27 years.
Yeah,
that's a long time.
27 years, Nike has put an ad in the Super Bowl.
Wow, I would have not thought that. I guess they don't have to, though, do they?
Well, I think they kind of did, right? Because they've
copped a lot of criticism, right?
They've been really struggling, with their identity, who they are, and what they're standing for. And I read something today that whilst they didn't make change first, they did make change. They recognized that they needed to make a shift, and I think they've really, they've. Similarly to how UAE committed in stage 2, they're fully committed to this push towards women's sport. And that ad is testament to that.
Any other good ads that I should watch first off?
I'm going to send you something, Gracie, on Instagram, and that gives you a little bit of a recap of a few of them. And it will only take up a few minutes of your life, but it's worth it. They're great. The Super Bowl ads are just so fantastic. And it's interesting, the celebrities that come out of the woodworks to celebrities you haven't seen for a long time that come out and do them. And you're like, oh my God, I used to love you. You're great.
Like Meg Ryan.
Yeah.
That was good.
That was a good one with Billy Crystal.
Mayonnaise. It's they recreated the scene from When Harry Met Sally with mayonnaise.
It was good. But
nice.
No, that was a little bit of my obsession, but I love the Nike ad was a standout one for me, and that has been doing the rounds. So I think well done by Nike. Maybe this is going to help improve their sales, because I think I read something about they're really struggling. And maybe as well, I think, how do you pronounce her name? The famous basketball player, AJ Wilson? She just came out with that incredible sneaker. So, yeah.
Talk to Kate Verino. She collects them. She'll know all about them.
Oh, she will. Kate, if you're listening.
What I'm is kind of piggybacks, like, so definitely obsessed with like the Nike ad at the moment. But actually probably the podcast that I sent to you, Gracie, yesterday, the
I
Minefield,
did
which I think
listen to it.
you haven't, or
No, I did. I tried to.
oh
I
yeah,
love like, I'll let you finish, sorry, but like
no, because like that
those
one,
those podcasts are really good, but like you actually
you got
can't
to
do
think.
anything else. You can't like I can't multitask. I have to like I kept having to skip back because I kept missing stuff because it's so dense and so good.
Yeah, it's a podcast with two journalists, one Australian, Waleed Ali, and Scott Stevens, who is a philosopher, academic. And I've sent the one to the World Talk group before around like how athletes have different rules to the rest of society and like how that
Oh, I
like
listened to that one.
manage that. Yeah, the one I sent. Yeah,
Yeah,
but they're
yeah,
doing a
yeah.
whole series called the School of Sport, and they're interviewing
Okay.
athletes and coaches. So that one was with Titus O'Reilly, who's a sport journalist and writer.
Mhm.
But the one I sent to Gracie was around like pride versus ego. So
Mm,
self-adoration versus self-respect in the context
interesting.
of an athlete. Like, and that was like kind of not dissimilar to what we were talking about before in the conversation around sprinters and how Lorena has the confidence in her ability to to deliver, despite the fact she might not have a perfect run in. And I think that like I think to be the best, and Gracie, Lauren, you guys correct me, but like I think to be the best, particularly in a sport like cycling, you need to have a bit of swagger about you because there's so much shit that can go wrong. So you need to have constant belief that you have the goods, even if sometimes it's very difficult.
Oh,
Yeah.
it'd be
I
really
think
interesting to listen to this because I'm thinking of a certain sprinter that just had too much ego. And I feel like Weber's for me is just, she's the package.
Mm-hmm.
yeah. I remember someone saying to me a long time ago that you got to walk into a room or you got to walk into I'm pretty sure it's a Michael Jordan quote, but I'm sure the listeners will correct me if I'm wrong. But yeah, you've got to walk into a room expecting everyone else is there to get second. And I'm probably misquoting that, but that was the gist of it. And it's like that's really actually hard to distill that and to really believe that. It takes a lot of work to get yourself to that point, I think. And
Yeah.
for it to not just be pure arrogance or naivety or whatever, but to actually like know it and not
Mm,
have a big head about it.
Mm. Fascinating. Yeah. And to walk that knife edge of like pride, ego, how much is reality? How much is it within your own head? But I think you have to have a little bit of non-reality in the swagger that you create in the story you keep telling yourself because that's the goal that you're aspiring to. Yeah, it's interesting.
it's just like it's unlocking that next level of self-belief. And I feel I'm just thinking with myself, there's no ego attached, but the only time I've ever felt like I've shown up to a race and I was like, I was the one to beat was when I was racing NRS in 2011. And at that time, I was the sprinter on the national scene to beat. And I knew it, like, and I had that belief. And for the first time in my life, because I've been doing sport for so long, it was so nice to know, okay, like today is on you. So like if you win or lose, it's on you because you know you have the goods to win. If everything goes to plan, like your legs will do it and you will be
Mm.
successful. I think there's very few opportunities in an athlete's career where you show up on that day and really believe it. But when you
Yeah.
speak to people, I'll still remember Dignan at the 2015 World Championships in Richmond. She knew on that day she was the rider to beat.
Mm-hmm.
And she really believed it and she felt it in herself and she just knew it. She knew it was going to happen, even until the last moment when they were going for the sprint against like Garnier and Anna van der Breggen.
Yeah, I think it's an important skill as an athlete to have. I've certainly had moments in my career where I've dipped, but let's just say that after like I don't know why I got quite emotional listening to that episode. I was lucky
Mm.
then to follow up that like with a psych appointment, like unpack that. But
Mm.
yeah, it's I think if the listeners would like to dive in, they've currently done four episodes. The latest one was really interesting. I actually sent it off to my coach, Nick Owen, around coaching, and they interviewed Craig Fitzgibbons, who's an NRL coach here in Australia, around what is good coaching. And they begin the conversation, which I did laugh about, how some athletes are like they like overthinkers and underthinkers. And I
Yeah,
did
and
have a gig.
we'll link that in the show notes for any listeners who are interested. Definitely anything that Georgie recommends, I put in the ears when I'm doing my Zwift sessions. Good listening.
I think, yeah, this one requires a bit of a notebook, as Gracie said.
I need to go back and listen to those two again because I've only absorbed about half of it, even with skipping back a bunch of times. So, but yeah, it's not boring. It's just, yeah, really dense, which is good, actually.
Yeah.
My obsession is a book that I'm reading. It's a memoir by Gina Chick. And if anyone's been listening for a long time, you know I'm obsessed with the Alone TV series. And Gina won the Australian season 1. And her winning that show was not the remarkable thing about her. She's a remarkable person and her story, but she's also a writer as well. And this book is just like one of the most well-written books I've read in a long time. She has such a great control over her storytelling and vocabulary, and I'm just enjoying it. And I'm going to be so sad when I finish it. I think it's going to be one of those books that you're going to want to read again. And I think a lot to relate to if you've had an interesting life or you've always felt a little bit different for one reason or another.
I'm going to put that on my next book list.
She's very impressive. Did you listen to her Imperfects episode, Gracie?
That was a great interview.
Oh, that's a good podcast, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, the Imperfects. Link that one as well. But Gina Chick, highly recommend that recommendation from Gracie. She's a fascinating individual.
Yeah, I'm obsessed with her. So anything that she does, I listen to or read because she's just one of those people that's just like pure, you know, like just actually authentic. And it's not crap. It's just like a life lived and lessons learned. And she's just molded all of her experiences into beautiful things. I don't know how else to say it.
Great.
Guys,
thank you for the recommendations. Love it.
I love our recommendations. They're so good.
I hope people listen to the obsessions because they're so worth it most of the time. Like, I mean, mine was one of the one of the more lamer ones. But if you haven't watched the ads, definitely watch them. They're quite funny.
No, because then that led into a discussion about marketing.
There you go.
The struggles of so definitely had substance.
Well, that is it for this episode today. Thank you for listening to us, and we will be back next week. And like I said, it will be the Draft podcast. So that's going to be a bit of fun. If anyone followed the draft last year, you know how competitive Matilda Reynolds and I got, particularly towards the end there, where I was like holding on. She overtook me and held it to the line. So second place.
And how much Abby's mental health was impacted through the year.
Yeah.
Oh, really? My first one. I'm a bit nervous.
It's a lot of fun. And yes, it does get competitive. We are all athletes, former athletes, always athletes in the mind. So definitely join that episode that will come out next week.